Alright, so recently I've been reading about the various Pascal Siakam trade rumors that have been popping up as we get closer to the deadline. And the more that comes out, the more that I'm convinced the Raptors front office it doesn't know how to manage its assets. Alright, so just to give you a recap on the Siakam stuff. Basically, the front office realizes that they need to get rid of Siakam before they let him go in free agency for nothing, right? And to do that, they've been looking for a trade, obviously. And one of the suitors for the trade was heavily rumored to be the Kings. And the Kings package that they offered, apparently the talks fell off a few days ago. And long story short, the Kings don't want him anymore. And since then, we've got reporting that kind of explains the falling out as Siakam himself basically torpedoing the trade because he didn't think the Kings were going to re-sign him for the max when his contract finishes in the summer. Which, he has a point, they probably wouldn't offer him the maximum contract. But to me, it was just indicative of this is a hole that the front office of the Raptors organization put themselves in. And what I mean by that is, the Raptors basically put themselves in this situation by not taking action on Siakam in earlier years, when his contract had more time on it. Siakam's basically holding the Raptors hostage, if you think about it. He doesn't have a no-trade clause or anything, but he's basically in a position where he's dictating where he can go, or if he even goes at all, because he's shown in the past that he really loves Toronto, so he might just be expecting that Toronto re-signs him for the max, which I heavily doubt that they would. But more to the point, this is more a symptom of the Raptors front office and their, I like to call it arrogance, because they're not necessarily one of the worst front offices in the whole league, right? It's not like they're the Wizards front office or anything. But these guys, they're so arrogant that on multiple times now, they've either believed in their team too much or valued individual players so much that they miss out on deals and then basically get way less value for those players than they originally would have. The first example I can remember of this was back in 2021 when they had a chance to get rid of Kyle Lowry for at least a few role players, if not some draft picks. And I remember that the Lakers and the Mavericks were some of the teams interested at that time. The Lakers especially, and I would know that because I'm a Lakers fan. They did offer up Lowry, but the Raptors just didn't take. So what eventually happened was, after the season finished, the Raptors did trade Kyle Lowry, but it was a sign and trade for two role players from the Heat, who were Goran Dragic, who had a disaster of a time in Toronto, and Precious Achiuwa, who was actually just traded to the Knicks in the OG Anunoby trade. But that's all they got for Kyle Lowry, who at that time was still perfectly capable of playing winning basketball. I guess you could say at the time that Precious Achiuwa was some sort of a win for them, but he really didn't amount to much, and the fact that he was basically filler in the OG Anunoby trade shows that the whole Kyle Lowry situation was horribly mismanaged, even though I remember a few Raptors fans trying to cope with the potential of Achiuwa. And it's funny because that was the last time the Raptors really made an impact on the league. That was when everyone expected them to kind of sell off and rebuild, but they didn't do that. They ended up just continuing their current roster and trying to win, basically. And that year they drafted Scotty Barnes, and they ended up making a surprise playoff run, and they made it to the 6th seed actually, when they faced the Sixers in the first round. Of course they lost, but I think that gave the front office a misguided vision of the future, where they really saw that as the start of a new era of Raptors basketball, when in reality it was kind of an exception. It was really an aberration that didn't really mean much to the team in the long run. So right after that year, they had, the 2022-23 season, where they basically hung around the 7th to 10th seeds all year and lost in the play-in to the Chicago Bulls, I believe. Now, of course, they flamed out last year, no surprise. But the thing that gets me is last year they made the trade deadline acquisition of Jakob Poeltl from the Spurs. Now this basically surprised the whole league and the whole NBA community because people were expecting them to start rebuilding at last year's trade deadline. Well, they didn't. They actually doubled down on their then current roster. So they actually sent out a 2024 first round pick to the Spurs for Jakob Poeltl, for some reason. Like, they needed a center, of course, but to give away a first-round pick when you know there's a big chance you're going to suck in 2024, which, surprise, they are sucking, then it just didn't make any sense to me and a lot of other people. And it was just a sign of this organization doesn't really have a plan, or didn't really have a plan for the team, other than let's try to win now. So of course the Pirtle trade ended up helping the team, of course. I'm not gonna twist the reality here. But it didn't help them to the point where they could get to the playoffs, and continued slumping until we get to the offseason of last year, where sure enough, after being expected to trade Fred VanVleet at the deadline and get something for him, the Raptors simply let him walk. So they got nothing. It wasn't even a sign and trade like with Lowry. They really just let him go to the Rockets. And he was highly paid. Like, I actually think the contract that VanVleet got, I think he deserved that 3-year, $130 million contract. But why did the Raptors let him walk for nothing? Again, that was directly avoidable if they just took some action at the trade deadline. I don't see the reasoning here. But anyway, they let him go, and predictably, they get even worse to start the season. As I'm recording this, they are 15-22 and 11th in the Eastern Conference. So they're basically going to be a lottery team this year, which is something they're going to have to be careful about because they do owe their first round pick this year to the Spurs, as I mentioned in that very ill-advised Pirtle trade. It is protected though. It is protected in the top 6. Now the pick is protected. It's a top 6 protected pick. So if the Raptors lose enough, I guess, they do have a big chance of keeping it. But I can just as easily see them landing in the 7th to 14th place and losing the pick. Now, that being said, there's a counter argument because the pick, if it doesn't convey this year, if they don't lose the pick this year, then it's just going to happen in the next year, in 2025. So it depends on how strongly the Raptors view the 2024 draft in the first place, which I'm not even going to get into. I myself, I'm not a draft person, so I'm not going to say if there's a good or bad draft this year. But again, it puts the Raptors in a situation of, okay, they're either going to waste this year for nothing, or they're going to waste next year for nothing. Like, my point is, why put yourself in that situation in the first place? So they're in a tough spot right now. I guess that's why they felt the pressure to finally trade OG Anunoby last week, I should say. Which, credit where it's due, it was a smart trade. They got some young players back in Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett, who so far have been working out pretty good for them. Of course, they did trade away Anunoby, but he wasn't really looking to be part of the team's future anyway. But you know what? It was a smart trade. I still have to mention though, OG was also supposedly on the table last year, and the Raptors overvalued him as well because there was reporting that a few teams, including the Grizzlies actually, they were the frontrunners to acquire him. They actually offered up multiple first-round picks. I think it was up to 3 first-round picks for OG, and apparently the Raptors didn't think it was worth it. Well, this year they gave him up for 2 players, which, granted, I think if you're rebuilding, I guess you could consider that Emmanuel Quickley and RJ, they're more proven than draft picks, and they can also be improved with development and such. So it's not a total loss is what I'm saying, but it's just the overall overvaluing of players. It didn't lead to any big return. They definitely could have gotten a lot more assets for what they had, because they do have players that a lot of teams in the league need. If we can go back to Siakam, there's a lot of teams who really want him. Now, I did mention the Kings, who were prepared to give away a good deal of what I think are important players and draft picks for him. There's also the Pacers, the Mavericks, the Warriors, all of whom have assets in there. But again, you get this feeling of now the Raptors have delayed trading away Siakam to the point where he has considerable leverage in his trade destination. So they're going to have to be smart about how they deal him, because this information being out just makes the Raptors lose leverage over other teams, knowing that Siakam is having such a heavy hand in the negotiations. Which all the more power to him, don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on Siakam's decisions, he's looking out for himself. But it is a tough situation for the organization to be in if their goal is to lose as many games as possible this year. But anyway, those are my thoughts on the current Siakam situation. Hopefully he does find a new team that can revitalize his career. Not that he's playing bad or anything, but he can finally compete for championships again. And yeah, if you made it this far and you liked what you heard, consider subscribing and giving a like. And yeah, I'm interested in what you think about the whole Siakam Raptors front office situation. See you later.